Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1107, 1107, Saturday, April the 19th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alrighty, don't forget to get your vote in the comments section of this video for your pick for Dumbass of the Week. And try to get your vote in before 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the comments section of this video. Alrighty. That's for Dumbass of the Week. Now, let's go ahead and get back to where we've been the last couple of days, staying on the Spygate story. I finally did get a chance to read and take a few notes through both of the transcripts with George Papadopoulos and this confidential informant 1, which was Stefan Halper, and then confidential informant number 2, which is this guy Jeffrey Wiseman. So we're going to go through that, and that'll take up most of the video, but I have a few other things to talk about before that. Of course, yesterday we had Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan, sending out another hateful tweet against Trump based, about his handling of coronavirus. Now, Mr. Potato Head doesn't really care about coronavirus or Trump's handling of coronavirus or anything else. This is just a continued campaign that Mr. Potato Head has been on since he left the government, since Trump came in as president. And, remember, he's a spook. And so what's really behind Mr. Potato Head's tweets is he's running a PSYOP, psychological operation. He knows that, and he knew, when Trump won the election, that he would eventually be brought to justice. Most likely would be brought to justice. And his argument, he's playing the politics side of it, is that that Trump is using Barr and Durham to go after his political enemies, and clearly Mr. Potato Head can assert himself as a political enemy based on his tweets. So Brennan is actually going to say, yeah, well, I keep holding the president accountable with my tweets, and he doesn't like that, and that's why he's going after me. So this is why Mr. Potato Head continues to do his tweets. It's a psychological operation that he's running for political purposes. But you see, none of this is really going to matter, because once you get into court, no one really cares about that type of thing. It's going to be the facts, the evidence, and that will be based on documents and witness testimony and other things. But it will be the facts and the evidence that will ultimately decide the fate of Mr. Potato Head. And all this political stuff he's trying to do, it might give him cover in the media, which is what he's most probably concerned about. But ultimately, none of this stuff's going to matter. He's still going to be held accountable for his crimes, and I'm absolutely certain of that. And I have been for a very, very long time. Let's move on to the next topic. Yeah, well, I guess many of you saw the latest Joe Biden interview. This one from, I think, 2 days ago, where he was on the Commie News Network with Anderson Cooper. And also in that interview was this Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is like one of CNN's regular medical correspondents or what have you. And he's an anti-Trumper, of course. So if many of you, I'm sure, saw the interview, it's probably one of the worst that I've seen, and it shows that that Brisma Joe's condition is getting progressively worse. I mean, that one was really bad. But what actually makes that one a little bit different is that just the camera shot that they give you when Brisma Joe is talking, you also have Anderson Cooper on the left, and you've got Gupta in the center and Biden on the right. So you can see all of their facial expressions as Brisma Joe is trying to make a point. And you can clearly see the looks on the faces of Cooper and especially on Gupta. They're realizing as Biden is attempting to complete a sentence that this guy is gone. He's Gonzville. He's gonzo. So you can really see it, and that's what makes it probably even a more damning video, because you're actually seeing in real time the honest reactions on the faces of Cooper and Gupta. They are literally like, you can see they're cringing, and they realize, you can see the look on their faces, like they know that what it is that they're witnessing here. They're witnessing the Democrat nominee, and he is out to lunch. You know, he's not all there, and clearly you can see this, and I think that's what makes this one so damaging. And you know, as I said, I've had 3 of my 4 grandparents. Well, 2 of them had dementia. One actually died of Alzheimer's. So I've seen both dementia and Alzheimer's close up and personal. I've seen how it operates. With one of my grandparents, it was a slow process. It took, you know, quite a few years to go from just when we started noticing little things to the point where she was pretty much, you know, gone mentally, but she was 96 by then. But in her late 80s, we started noticing her mind slipping a little bit, and by the time she was in her early 90s, her mind was pretty much gone. My other grandmother, who's still alive actually, she's 94. She has issues. Her dementia is, you know, it's progressing, but it's not nearly as quick as my other grandma. But my great grandmother on my dad's side, she also had Alzheimer's, and with her it happened very quickly. You know, from the time that they first noticed issues, it was only maybe 2 years, and she was in a full care facility, not even able, didn't even know who she was. So this you know, it doesn't work the same for everybody. Some people can have a slight case of dementia setting in as they get in their 70s, and it's a very slow progression. But for some people, it's much quicker. And you can see that in the case of Burisma Joe, if you just look at him back in the spring of last year when he kicked off his campaign, late spring, and you look at him today, you can see where he's getting progressively worse. And I guess the time, to me, it's time to pull the plug on Burisma Joe for the Democrats, because there's a certain point where the person with the issue doesn't even realize it. In other words, all of us are watching Burisma Joe. Everyone knows that his mind is going. It's you know, it's leaving him. Everyone knows this, but Burisma Joe. He is not aware that he is, you know, in a very progressive state of dementia. He's not aware of this. If he were, he would never put himself in the position he's in. That's why it's up to his family to pull the plug on this and get him out of there before this thing gets really embarrassing. It's no longer even funny anymore, really. It's a serious issue. I mean, he's got dementia, and it's progressing very rapidly. It's time for his family to pull the plug on it. This is embarrassing for Dementia Joe, who really puts the dementia in dim. You know, it's embarrassing for him, but it's sad for everyone else watching it. But there's something really ugly about the fact that his wife, his family, and all these Democrats, media people, and others are willing to let him go out there time after time and be exposed when he's clearly just having an issue with, you know, something that happens to people when they get up in years. And it's pretty disturbing, to be honest with you. And I think it's past time to pull the plug. But yeah, if you haven't seen that interview, you got to watch it. I think it's that video that tells me, and it should tell everyone, it's time to pull the plug on Burisma Joe. Now, starting to get some information from the recent release of documents, starting to get some things trickling out that people are discovering in here. One of them that's going to prove to be crucial, something we're learning, is we learned from this recent document release that there's no question now that Christopher Steele had a handler. He had an FBI handler as early as June of 2016. Now, according to the FBI, they swore under oath that there was no activity regarding the Trump-Russia investigation until July 31st, 2016, when they kicked off Operation Crossfire Hurricane. But clearly we now have evidence that Steele had an FBI handler in June of 2016. So they have to be lying again, and they're caught red-handed. A lot of people talking about the John Solomon interview. We've already talked about it, but a lot of people are talking about the fact that he said that he's not expecting a lot of indictments, only just a few indictments or whatever. Well, I think there's probably already many indictments. I'm thinking probably a dozen or more already unsealed indictments, and eventually sealed indictments, which will eventually become unsealed indictments when the time comes. But I don't worry too much about that statement by John Solomon, because it was just 2 or 3 weeks ago that he was saying that he didn't really know if anybody would be held legally responsible for their crimes. And he was saying, I just hope we get to the truth and expose what happened. And yeah, people should probably be, go to jail, but, I'm not sure that's going to happen, and it's not so important to me that happened. What's important to me is we get the truth out. That was what Solomon was saying about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now, he's a pretty moderately, he keeps a very moderate tone about, when you see him being interviewed. He doesn't make bold predictions. He doesn't do any of that stuff. And he usually downplays things quite a bit. And so I just take this as John Solomon downplaying it, so that when it all happens, he can come out and say, boy, I'm really surprised. I didn't expect to see this many people indicted or whatever. But take my word for it. There's going to be more than just a handful of people indicted here. I mean, just look at the situation. It's a vast conspiracy involving many, many people, dozens of people. And Durham's not going to only indict just a few and let the rest off the hook. He's going to indict everybody who's part of this. And you really have to. I mean, that's his obligation in his job. And I think he'll do his job. And keep in mind, when you look at Spygate compared to Watergate, Spygate's about 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times worse than what happened in Watergate. And remember, in Watergate, you had 22 very high-level people go to prison. And that would include 2 attorney generals, Richard Kleindienst and John... what's his name? John... Boom. Oh, boy. I can't remember. Too many names. But 2 attorney generals from the Nixon administration went to jail over Watergate. The vice president was kind of forced out. You had Nixon's chief of staff. You had Nixon's lawyer. The top people in the Nixon administration, 22 of them, all went to jail. And even Dean, who... president's lawyer, who actually turned really and became the guy who kind of turned, even he got a jail time in like a country club type prison, but he did get a jail sentence. And all the rest of them then went to like regular type prison. So, and I think Liddy got like 5.5. I think he actually did 5.5 years. I'm not sure what his original sentence was, but I think he actually was in jail for 5.5 years. So. Yeah, I don't think too much about the statement John Solomon's making about, he doesn't think there'll be that many people. Oh, yeah. I believe that there'll be at least 2 to 3 dozen of the initial round, probably first 1, 2, 3 rounds of indictments. And then I believe that after that, there'll still be probably a couple dozen more that'll be referred back to the DOJ, and they'll still be prosecuting this on for... This is going to go on, just the prosecution of these people will go on for probably at least about 2 years before they finally wind it all down and get to the bottom of it and get to everybody. Obviously, it's at a point now, I think, where Durham's gotten most of the evidence that he can get based on witness testimony, grand jury testimony, documents, and other things. I think now he's in a situation he needs some people from the inside to talk. He's obviously already working with Mike Rogers. The fact that we see no fire being directed at Rodenstein, and the fact that Rodenstein got a real sort of very good send-off from Attorney General Barr and the DOJ leads me to believe that very early on, after Barr came in, Rodenstein probably flipped. So I think Rodenstein's probably working with Durham. I think Rogers is working with Durham. And now that in the last 2 weeks or so, since the interview with Laura Ingraham and the documents that have been released, I think that was a message to the coup plotters that they are going to be indicted. And what that means is that they're all going to be getting with their lawyers. And, of course, everyone understands you don't want to be the second, third, fourth, fifth guy in line looking to cut a deal, because Durham only really needs one person who can come in and flip someone high level enough that knows pretty much everyone, what everyone was doing, what was going on. So it could be a Comey, could be a Brennan, could be a Clapper, could be Strzok, Page, could be any of these people in the very top tier and who knew what was going on, or could be someone within the Obama administration in the cabinet. Could be someone. It's going to have to be a high level person because they're going to have to be able to give Durham what he wants to get the kind of deal that they'll be looking for. So I do expect that you're going to probably have some people realizing that it's over, that the game is up, and that's when people start coming forward and flipping. And so I think that that'll be happening over the next couple of weeks. Solomon says he thinks there could be indictments as early as this week. Well, I think there's already indictments. I just think they're sealed. So yeah, I think there's been indictments probably for several weeks now, maybe months. I think that there'll be more, and I think that eventually, as you know, the cases unfold, Durham will unseal those subpoenas or those indictments as he's moving through the process. So that's what I think about the Solomon comments on who he thinks will go to jail and that type of thing. I don't put much into it. I think he's underplaying it, is what I think, purposely. That's just kind of his style, which is fine. That's good. Now, before I get into going through the transcripts with the confidential human sources, the two that we have from Halper and Papadopoulos and his buddy, his friend, his former guy, he thought he was his friend, this Jeffrey Wiseman, obviously not a friend. He's wearing a wire trying to get Papadopoulos corrupted into some sort of a crime. So clearly he's not Papadopoulos' friend. But Papadopoulos thought he was a friend. But before I get into that, I want to preface this with two things that I want you to keep in mind as we're moving forward at this point. First is an article from Larry Johnson. Now, many of you know who Larry Johnson is. He's, I think, former CIA. A lot of his, writings you'll see in the Gateway Pundit, various other places. I like Larry Johnson. I think he probably gets a lot of things right. I don't know if he's 100% right on everything, and I don't know if he's 100% right on this. But he had written a while back the following, and I covered it at that time when he wrote this article. But I want to kind of refresh everybody's memory on something he said in an article from several months back. Larry Johnson said, well, he was asking the question, who was Halper working for? Because as we know, the FBI says that they had no confidential informants in the Trump campaign until Operation Crossfire Hurricane started, which would be July 31st, 2016. But yet we all know, it's public record, that Halper was actually working on Papadopoulos in the spring of 2015, right along with Downer, right along with Mifsud. Of course, Halper was also on top of Carter Page back earlier in the spring of 2016, and he was actually working on Flynn back in 2015. So clearly Halper had been actively involved with these main three players, and of course he also there's also probably a transcript of Sam Clovis, because Halper also went to Sam Clovis and was wearing a wire for that conversation as well. We just haven't seen that transcript released. So Halper was a very busy spy before July 31st. There's no question about that. So the question that Larry Johnson was asking in this article is, who was Halper working for? If he wasn't working for the FBI, then he was working for somebody, because he's actively spying on Page, Flynn, Papadopoulos, and probably others. And so the first logical knee-jerk reaction to that question is, well, he must have been working for the CIA, which is what he typically works for. And of course, that's very likely, that he was very likely working for the CIA. But in this particular article, Larry Johnson makes another suggestion. He suggests that Halper was probably working for the Clinton campaign, specifically the Clintons. And this has something to do with, of course, we know that Halper and Downer are very good friends. Downer is on the board at Hackloot, and has had an association with them for a long time. Halper is someone who associates with a lot of hack-loot people. So I think he's suggesting that maybe Halper and Downer were working together, and that maybe something like that is going on. And keep in mind, Alexander Down the Hatch Downer has known the Clintons for a very long time. And in fact, he and Bill Clinton were classmates and buddies together at Oxford back in the early 1970s. And of course, we know that when Downer was a public official in Australia, he made a rather large contribution to the Clinton Foundation of Australian taxpayer money. So there's no question that you have a relationship there between Downer and the Clintons, and you have a relationship here between Downer, Halper, and Hackloot, the private intelligence firm. And so it's suggested by Larry Johnson that maybe Clinton, even before the FBI, even before Steele, even before any of that, that they may have reached out to Hackloot and put them on the payroll to look into Trump-Russia association. So that's kind of the argument, and he kind of buttresses that by reminding us of that conversation that we learned about from the Podesta emails, that Podesta was having a phone conversation with this Democratic strategist named Brent Budowski. This was back in December of 2015. December of 2015. In that conversation, Budowski tells Podesta, who was the chairman of the Reverend Clinton's campaign, that they need to slaughter Donald Trump for his bromance with Putin, and the sooner and stronger the better. So here's Budowski telling Podesta, Clinton's campaign manager, back in December of 2015, to tar and feather Trump about his bromance with Putin. That was back in December of 2015. So clearly, the Clinton campaign, and we know Robbie Mooks was very early on at spitting out the Trump-Russia narrative. So really, the Clinton campaign was spitting out the Trump-Russia narrative BS long before even the CIA or the FBI picked up that mantle. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. We also have something else coming out of the new releases that another little jewel someone has found, and that is that it's now no doubt that the Crossfire Hurricane team did advise the FISA court that they had verified the dossier information. They told the FISA court that they had verified Steele's information. Oh, boy. Okay, so let's just go through these two transcripts. The first one with confidential informant, human source number one, which is Stefan Halper, the fat man. Of course, this took place in London. And the general nature of this deal is that they're having dinner, and it's Halper along with this supposedly very voluptuous blonde intelligence asset named, I guess, Azra Turk. We don't know her real name, but that's the name she was using. They had this dinner. Halper is pressing Papadopoulos a lot on Russia stuff and WikiLeaks and the hacks and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, Halper leaves, not before they had several drinks. And even Halper himself, after this happens, he says to someone after he leaves Papadopoulos that he's a little loopy from the drinks. And the idea was to leave him behind with Azra Turk, and she was going to get Pops drunk and then take him up to a room somewhere and hope for some pillow talk. That's how they were working that. So it never actually happened, though. Pops never took advantage. And he obviously smelled a rat, and he even tells this other informant that he smelled a rat, that he got the feeling that Halper was like intelligence or something. So here's just some of the things, specific things in the conversation. Now, keep in mind, Halper is passing himself off as just sort of a establishment Republican, not a fan of Hillary, not really a big fan of Trump, concerned about various things going on with Trump and the Russia stuff, kind of concerns him a little bit, but he's kind of laying it back like that, and he's showing his prowess as a foreign policy expert and touting his accomplishments, working with all these previous Republican administrations or whatever. And so Papadopoulos is kind of, sees him as a senior, guy who has a lot. And Papadopoulos is really interested in what Halper can teach him about China and India and Eurasia. But he has no real interest, really, in Russia, it doesn't seem. But Halper continues to try to bring the conversation back to Russia, back to WikiLeaks, back to the hacks and all that. And every single time he does it, Papadopoulos shuts it down and says, no, I don't know anything about that. We would never do anything like that, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the general nature of it. Halper does get frustrated at some point, and he leaves Papadopoulos there with this blonde bombshell spy. Okay, so Halper, during the conversations, Halper tells Papadopoulos that he has a lot of friends. Now, this is Halper telling Papadopoulos. He says, yeah, I have a lot of friends in Russia. And he says that one of them friends is Slava Trubnikov. And he asked Papadopoulos, do you know Trubnikov? He was director of the KGB. And Papadopoulos is like, no. And then Halper then tells Papadopoulos that he, Halper, brought Trubnikov to somewhere, and we know it's the London Center. It's blacked out, but we know it's the London Center, to talk about intelligence. Halper tells Papadopoulos that Trubnikov is a private citizen, but he's really plugged in and is very helpful in all kinds of ways. Halper says he is a friend of ours. I have enjoyed his friendship all over the world. I've met with him everywhere, and we talk from time to time. Then, of course, Halper goes on to mention another guy who's the head of the Moscow KGB. His name is Sarkov, and it's Sarkov and Trubnikov are both the names that Christopher Steele eventually drops on Kathleen Kavalik. Halper also tells Papadopoulos that he has a good relationship with a really senior KGB general named Shebashin, S-H-E-B-A-S-H-E-E-N. And he asks Papadopoulos if he knows him. And Papadopoulos says no. So Papadopoulos doesn't know any of these Russian people, intel people. And Halper said, oh yeah, they're friends of mine, good friends of ours. So clearly you can see that Halper is trying to get Papadopoulos to feel that it's okay to be friendly with these foreign Russian intel people, which Halper obviously has a good friendship with, who eventually Steele tells Kavalik is sources for him. So, as I've said before, I think Halper was feeding these Russians and they were feeding Steele. And I think that that's what he means when he said they've been very helpful to us. Yeah, they were very helpful. With Halper was giving these two Russians this dirt that they wanted to give to Steele. Then Halper says, my point is the Russians can be very helpful to us at this time, and we've got some great information coming out. You know, this stuff coming out of WikiLeaks is really superb about Hillary's health. And then Papadopoulos then starts describing, it goes into, he talks about that a little bit. They joke about Hillary falling down or whatever. And then the next conversation gets back into WikiLeaks, and Papadopoulos starts talking to Halper about Seth Rich. Now, they black out Seth Rich's name, but you know it's Seth Rich that they're talking about. And Papadopoulos explains to Halper the whole theory behind the whole Seth Rich conspiracy, and Halper pretends to be completely like he doesn't know anything about it. Obviously, he does. But he's pretending he doesn't know anything about it. See, in fact, after Papadopoulos explains the whole thing to him, Halper says, you're kidding. You're kidding, really? I've never heard that conspiracy before. You must be kidding. So Papadopoulos explains the Seth Rich story, and then Halper then comments, quote, well, chalk up another one for the Clintons. So clearly, Halper is trying to play, in which he does throughout the entire time. He's trying to get into Papadopoulos' good graces, and he actually tries to play into Papadopoulos here by which shows you that Halper obviously knows that there's a theory by a lot of people that the Clintons have a body count thing going on, and Halper says, yeah, chalk another one up for the Clintons. Halper then asked Papadopoulos if the campaign knew anything about the leaks, which he did in multiple times in different ways, and every time Papadopoulos tells him flatly, no. Halper again tells Papadopoulos how much the Russians could help the campaign, working with WikiLeaks. Papadopoulos then tells Halper the campaign would not engage in that type of activity. He says it's illegal, it compromises national security, and it sets a bad precedent. He says we do not reach out to WikiLeaks or to collaborate with them. We don't. No one wants that. So it's not just that Halper is trying to find out if Papadopoulos is into any of this stuff with the campaign, but in fact he's trying to motivate Papadopoulos to talk to these Russian assets like Trubnikov and Surkov. He's trying to they're even trying to get Papadopoulos to go on a trip to Russia, to visit Russia and meet some Russians. And here Halper is trying to convince Papadopoulos that they should make contact with people in WikiLeaks and work with WikiLeaks to get more dirt on Hillary. So that's what Halper is trying to get Papadopoulos to do. Once he realizes that Papadopoulos hasn't given him the answers he wants, he wanted Papadopoulos to say, yeah, we kind of think this is cool, WikiLeaks, and yeah, this is all good, and whatever. When Papadopoulos is like, no, the campaign has nothing to do with any of that, no, WikiLeaks, none of that garbage, we wouldn't have anything to do with it, it's illegal, we don't know anything about it, whatever. At that point, after 2 or 3 attempts at that, Halper finally loses his patience, and then he just goes completely off the rails and starts suggesting that Papadopoulos should go to Russia, starts telling Papadopoulos about what good friends he is with these Russian intel guys, and how maybe he should, talk to them or meet with them, and starts telling Papadopoulos, yeah, well, you really got to get the campaign to start working with WikiLeaks. I mean, this is literally, read it for yourself. It's incredible. Now, the other confidential human source is a guy who Papadopoulos used to work with, and Papadopoulos thinks he's a friend, so the conversation's much different. And so this guy's name is Jeffrey Wiseman, and he worked at a think tank with Papadopoulos. Now he's wearing a wire for the FBI to try to entrap Papadopoulos, so clearly not a friend. Papadopoulos, of course, has no idea about any of this. Now, this is a very lengthy interview because it actually begins like in a lobby somewhere, and then they end up in a restaurant having lunch. They go from there to a casino. From the casino, then this guy gives Papadopoulos a ride back to where his hotel, and everything. All that is wired conversation. You get it all. Now, about 90% of what they're talking about is just garbage stuff. Just talking about finances, talking about money, talking about girls, and all kinds of stuff. And when their past history, when they worked together and went out drinking or chasing women or whatever. So, but this guy is really a blowhard. He's really an asshole, and he's touting to Papadopoulos about how much money he's got and how much connections he's got, especially in Russia, and how there's so much money to be made in Russia. And he's trying to get Papadopoulos to warm up to the idea that he should go to Russia, and because there's a lot of opportunities to make money there. And he's even telling Papadopoulos, yeah, well, I'm going to be going there next week. Hey, man, you ought to join me. You ought to go with me to Russia, blah, blah, blah. So this guy is trying to get Papadopoulos to go on a trip with him to Russia. This guy does bring up... Now, this guy actually comes out and tells Papadopoulos that he doesn't like Trump at all. Doesn't like Trump at all. Doesn't really like Hillary, but he thinks she's the best of two evils. But he doesn't like Trump at all, and he starts kind of giving Papadopoulos a rough time about working for the Trump campaign. Of course, Papadopoulos begins to defend himself and Trump, but the guy's not really having any of it. He's just kind of an arrogant sort of dude, and he's bragging about how much money he's got and how he's making all this money in Russia. There's great opportunities there, and he's really kind of talking this up. Papadopoulos does disclose to this guy about the conversation he had with Halper, and he said, it's kind of strange. Papadopoulos actually says this to the guy. He says, it's actually kind of strange. You're wanting to talk about, the DNC, the hacks, the Russia, all this Russia stuff and DNC hacks and stuff. That I had dinner with this guy in London, this Halper guy, and he also kept wanting to talk about, this. It's all kind of strange, So Papadopoulos is figuring out that he has no real interest in Russia. I mean, he doesn't know anything about it, don't know any Russians, is not interested or anything else, but both of these guys keep wanting to take the conversation into Russia, WikiLeaks, hacks, and now this guy is a little more forceful with Papadopoulos and thinking, yeah, I think there's something going on with the Trump campaign. Yeah, I think they were definitely working with, you may not know about it, but, just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it's not happening. But I think they were involved with WikiLeaks and the Russians, and so that's where this guy kind of goes with it. But anyway, 90% of that conversation is just BS, and it's about a lot of things. There's just a few times, 3 or 4 or 5 times maybe, where this guy brings the conversation to Trump, Russia, WikiLeaks and stuff. But for the most part, Papadopoulos is solid throughout. He's constantly solid as far as none of this stuff is true. It's all a hoax, and I want to talk about it. So anyway, there you go. You can read the transcripts for yourself. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. And thank you so much for tuning in. All out of time. See ya. Bye.